You already know failure can teach you things. You've heard it 100 times. Edison and his 10,000 attempts. Jordan getting cut from the team. J.K. Rowling and her rejection letters. You've nodded along to all of it. And yet, the next time something goes wrong, you will still get that drop in your stomach, the same quiet voice in your head that tells you, maybe I'm not good enough. So what's actually going on? If we know failure is useful, why does it still hit like a truck? Welcome to Perspectus, a channel where we break down ideas, concepts, and moments in history to help you think sharper, see clearer, and reshape your reality. More importantly, this is about building a strong community of people committed to growth, perspective, and understanding. If that's you, you're in the right place. It's not enough to know that failure is a teacher. Instead, you have to know how to read what it is telling you. And the reason most people cannot, the reason the lesson never quite lands, is because it goes deeper than your mindset. It goes all the way down to the wiring of your brain. By the end of this, hopefully we'll have a better understanding of why our brains were actually built to learn from failure, and one thing that determines whether we actually do. Think back to the first time you really failed at something. Not a minor stumble. The kind of failure that stuck with you. An exam, a relationship, maybe a job or a business. It just has to be something you genuinely cared about. Now, what was the story you told yourself in the aftermath? For most of us, it goes something like this. Rather than, oh, this attempt didn't work, we take the angle of, I wasn't good enough. And that distinction between a failed attempt and a failed person is where everything goes wrong. Psychologist Carol Dweck spent decades studying why some people bounce back from failure and others collapse. What she found out wasn't about talent, intelligence, or even work ethic. Instead, it was about interpretation. People with what she called a fixed mindset saw failure as a verdict. It was simply a proof of their own limitations, something that they could not change. Whereas the others were people with what she called a growth mindset, and they see these failures as data points. Information about where to adapt and improve when they iterate again and again as they go forward in life. Here's the part that should make us uncomfortable. We're not born with one or the other. Instead, we are taught. From a young age, most of us are either praised or punished for outcomes. The grade, the win, the result. But seemingly none of us are praised for the process, not for the quality of your effort or what we noticed along the way. Instead, it's very black and white. Did you succeed or did you fail? And so growing up, we learn gradually that failure means something about us. It comes to define us. Even though this is wrong, it becomes a statement rather than a signal. That framing is ancient, and it is in almost every meaningful sense wrong. Here is something I find genuinely fascinating. Your brain doesn't actually need to be convinced that failure is useful. It already treats it that way, automatically, unconsciously, every single time something doesn't go the way you'd expect. There's a class of neurons deep in the brain called dopaminergic neurons. Their job broadly is to track predictions. When you expect something to happen and it does, they fire steadily. When things go better than expected, they fire more. But when things go worse than expected, when you fail, they actually go quiet. They produce what neuroscientists call a negative prediction error. That signal is not punishment. Instead, it's the inverse. It's actually a correction. The brain registers the gap between what it predicted and what actually happened. And it uses the gap to update your future behavior. It's quite literally rewiring your brain based on the mismatch. In other words, your brain is already treating failure as feedback. It's been doing it before you could walk. The biology doesn't change. The problem is everything else that affects the mind on top of that. Because the moment you layer in shame, or you rush to get away from it, or you avoid discomfort, or the story that is failure says something permanent about you or who you are overriding your brain's signal. Instead, you actually feel the failure because you stop reading it. The data is there, but you're just not reading it. Interestingly, the Stoics understood this intuitively, centuries before neuroscience was even a thing. Marcus Aurelius wrote that nature takes every obstacle and works around it, incorporates it into itself, turns it into its own purpose. He said, just as nature takes every impediment and works around it, so too a rational being can turn each setback into raw material. Now, funnily enough, the body does this naturally. The hard question is whether you allow your mind to follow it. Seneca even put it more directly. He said, no one finds out what he can do except by trying. Simple as that. Not thinking about trying, not preparing indefinitely, which I know many of us succumb to. I know I do. But the key is trying and then crucially paying attention to what comes back as a result. The people we most associate with failure turned success weren't actually special because they were unusually resilient. Instead, they were special because they were unusually attentive. Thomas Edison didn't just keep going after 10,000 attempts at the light bulbs. Instead, he kept records. Each failed attempt was catalogued, studied, and it was fed back into the next iteration of the experiment. His famous quote is, "I have not failed, I have just found 10,000 ways that won't work." And ultimately, this isn't just bravado. It's a description of a method. Every failure was a data point for him. Edison was meticulous about reading them. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. He went home, closed himself in his room, and cried. He could have given up, like the majority of people do, but instead, he got to work. Later in life, he said, "I have failed over and over and over again in my life, and that's why I have succeeded." But the reason it worked wasn't because he kept showing up. It's not as straightforward as that. It's not that every missed shot, every lost game was a failure. It was that every one of these was a piece of information that allowed him to improve going forward. J.K. Rowling was rejected by 12 publishers before Harry Potter was accepted. 12 times she was told no. Now, she didn't wallow in shame or pity. She didn't take this as an indictment on the quality of her work. Instead, each time she kept refining. The rejections were used as feedback. Sometimes they were generic, but sometimes specific. Either way, she used every one of them. Abraham Lincoln. He failed in business, he lost elections, he had a nervous breakdown, and he spent years in professional obscurity, all before becoming president of the United States. And he then went on to hold the nation together through a civil war. Similarly, Winston Churchill was locked out of government for 10 years in his so-called wilderness years. These ranged between 1929 and 39. He used that time to write, observe, and build clarity of thinking. This would later go on to define his leadership during wartime Britain. What connects all of these people is not that failure didn't hurt. Of course it did. They feel failure the same way you and I do. but instead it's that they stayed with it long enough to hear what it was saying. Now, here's the counterintuitive part, but I think this is important. Research published by the American Psychological Association found something that cuts against the popular narrative. Across multiple studies, people consistently overestimated how often failure leads to success. In fields like medicine and professional licensing, tens of thousands of people who failed did not go on to pass. In fluid environments, such as film crews, project teams, anywhere where people don't work together for long periods of time, it resulted in failure not producing learning at all. Instead, it compounds. What this is telling us is that failure alone isn't the teacher. Failure without reflection is simply just pain. The variable isn't how many times you fall down. Instead, the variable is it's what you do in the space between falling down and getting back up again. So, what does this actually mean to treat failure as feedback? It starts with resisting the first instinct. We've all felt this. It's to get away from the feeling as fast as possible. You want to minimize it. Some rationalize it. Others catastrophize it. But we rarely sit with it and then ask ourselves, what does this tell me? Think of it this way. Imagine you had a coach, not a cheerleader, a real coach, watching everything you did. And every time something went wrong, instead of either ignoring it or making you feel terrible about the outcome, instead they just handed you a note. What is the note? It could be something specific, direct, but ultimately it's something useful. It could be something saying your timing was off, or you rushed the decision, or you didn't prepare for this contingency. That's what failure is. The note's already written. Most of us just never open it. Epictetus described adversity as being paired with a tough opponent by a trainer. Not to destroy you, instead to develop you. For what purpose, he asked? To turn you into Olympic class material. In this scenario, the obstacle isn't separate from the training. It is the training. The practice, practically speaking, looks like this. When something goes wrong, sit with it. Briefly, this isn't to punish yourself or replay the embarrassment or to wallow in pity. Instead, it's to ask yourself as honestly as you can, what was in my control? What would I do differently? And what did failure reveal that I couldn't have seen beforehand? That is how you action a growth mindset. It's not by repeating a motivational phrase. It's a process that you can return to every single time. Not failure is fine, because it's not always fine, but instead, what is this telling me? Dweck's research showed that students who outperformed weren't the ones who never failed. They were instead the ones who treated failure as a clue, who stayed curious about their own performances rather than becoming defensive about them. Here's what I want you to take from this. Your brain is already doing its job. The moment things go wrong, the correction signal fires. The prediction error is logged. Your biology is on your side. What you have to do is meet it halfway. Stay in the room long enough to hear it. Resist the urge, and I know it's a strong urge, but resist the urge to dismiss failure or become consumed by it. Instead, treat it like a coach's note. Not a verdict, not a compliment, but actionable information from someone who wants you to get better. Edison didn't have 10,000 failures. He had 10,000 pieces of information. Most of us give up well before the 10th, not even close to the 10,000th. But not because we lack talent, but because we stop reading the information. Remember, Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Not despite the obstacle, through it, because of it. Consume the obstacle and keep moving forward. Now, in reality, you are going to fail again, and so am I, and that's okay. The only question worth asking every single time from now on is, what is this telling me? Just start from there. If you found value in this, make sure to like and subscribe to join the Perspectus community. We're aiming to build something meaningful, and I'd like to hear your perspective too. So drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you in the next video.